This is Charlie Kirkpatrick, and in this video we're going to talk about the common types of cyber threats, but then start with what exactly is a cyber threat. So we'll get into some simple definitions of what we characterize as cyber threats. So just what is a cyber attack? A cyber attack can be essentially anything that changes the state of your current systems without your permission. These can include outside resources gaining access to your system somehow, denial of service attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, viruses and malware, unauthorized use both internally and externally, as I mentioned earlier, any unwanted changes, and any inappropriate use that employees or ex-employees, if they were not terminated properly, can impact or can affect on some of your systems. So there are 6, and I say fairly, common types of threats that we're going to discuss in this video. The first threat is commonly called an APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. These threats are arguably some of the most difficult to defend against and the difficult to understand the depth of issues when you are under an APT type attack. There's essentially 5 phases to an APT. Number 1 is the reconnaissance phase, and this is where a particular piece of software is somehow inserted into your systems. And it really doesn't do anything at this point except lay low and observe and look for patterns, look for weaknesses, cyber defense weaknesses within your network, within your systems. Then, once a weakness has been determined, the software will then deliver some type of malware to your systems. This is called the incursion phase of an APT. Next is discovery, and in this phase, this is where the malware searches through your system and finds specific vulnerabilities in which they can exploit. At that point is the capture phase. At this point, we are capturing data, capturing information of one sort or the other, and then moving on to the final phase, exfiltration. This is taking that data and doing something with it, moving it offsite, and doing something that you don't want to have happen to that to that data or that information. You can use your imagination as to how serious and what types of activities could take place here, but that's essentially how an APT threat, the 5 phases that an APT threat goes through. Next up is distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS. This is where a number of machines are taken over that target a particular server, sets of servers, websites, if you may, that maintain servers that maintain websites, and overwhelm them with activity. The analogy that I like to use with the distributed denial of service attack is, imagine if you are trying to study for an exam, and all you want to do is be left alone and be free to study what you need to study for this exam. But there's someone tapping you on the shoulder every 5 minutes, let's say. And then suddenly there's 2 or 3 people tapping you on the shoulder every couple of minutes. And then let's say there's a bunch more people that approach you and are tapping you on your shoulder every couple of seconds. It makes it impossible for you to focus on getting the job done that you need to get done, which is study for the exam, right? Well, a distributed denial of service attack is very similar in that it overwhelms web servers with so many pings, so much information that it cannot respond, and when that takes place, the website usually crashes and is no longer available. A great example of this, and just a fascinating example of a distributed denial of service attack, is the attack that occurred in 2016 against Dyn Corporation. Dyn is a DNS provider, domain name services provider, a very popular provider up in the Northeast. And they were attacked via a distributed denial of service attack a couple of years ago, and the attack occurred through IoT devices, specifically cable boxes, and of all things, security cameras that were hacked and then targeted the Dyn Corporation, and in doing so ended up bringing down a substantial percentage of very popular websites, including Amazon, here in the US and throughout the world, actually. And the virus that did this, or the botnet that did this, is the Mirai botnet, and you can read all sorts of articles about that. Next up is insider attacks. This is where people within your organization perhaps have privileges that they should not have bestowed upon them, and use those privileges either wittingly or otherwise to do damage to your systems. Ex-employees are a good example of an opportunity for insider attack. You have to be careful when employees leave your organization, either voluntarily or involuntarily. You have to be very careful that there is a process in place to terminate their access to whichever systems that they may have access to. There's many, quite frankly, common sense actions that you that can take place to help resolve these types of issues, and it essentially boils down to policies and procedures around your HR management functions. Next up, malware. Think of malware as external program, some type of an external program that's been introduced to your computer. Now, malware is a somewhat generic term and can include viruses, spyware, worms, ransomware, a whole host of other types of variants of computer viruses. But think, when you hear the term malware, think software, external software that's introduced to a target computer. Password attacks. This is where systems systems are created. In fact, you can download brute force systems from the programs from the internet that guess passwords until they're cracked. Dictionary attacks are just using combinations of common words and rearranging them until they determine the proper password. And then one of the most frightening password attacks is done through key logging, and this is a type of malware that once it's on your machine literally records every keystroke that you have, that you do on your keyboard. So if you go to a particular site, say it's a bank or a brokerage firm, and you key in your user ID and password, well, that information is captured and then sent off-site somewhere that you probably don't want it to appear at. And at that point, the bad guys have your user ID and passwords to any number of sites that you may have been in while that keylogger has been active. Phishing attacks. Now, this is for those of you that are interested in politics. In 2016 and 17, we had some interesting shenanigans that took place with the Democratic National Party. This is John Podesta. He's former DNC chair. He fell victim to a phishing attack that apparently came from our friends in Russia. And in doing so, exposed the DNC to exposed many emails to apparently the Russians and WikiLeaks. A phishing attack is where you receive in many cases, an email that looks very legitimate. It directs you to go to some type of a website and log in. And in this case, I believe this was a password reset request that came to Mr. Podesta. He clicked on the link, he typed in his username and password, and well, the rest is still forming history. But phishing and many variants of phishing are a very common practice today. So there you have a rundown on 6 interesting and very popular forms of cyber attack. I hope you found this to be useful. Thank you.